This is from She magazine, August 1972. Elton John. Bruno Brofenbrenner meets the star-spangled Groucho Marx of rock. Life is exceedingly fat and juicy for Elton John at the moment. It's a life which embraces dinner with Princess Margaret. She told me she has a mellotron and a Hammond organ. A £50,000 Los Angeles-style house in Virginia Water, Hollywood film offers, all of which are turned down, and lesser perks like eating raw fish in Japan and oysters in Australia. The best food, he reckons, is French, but while over there recording Honky Chateau, he conceived a grand passion for bread and Marmite. He is at great pains to suggest that he'd much rather play a game of football or have a cosy knees up with his parents, but he's already hoping to buy a larger house with grounds and stables. Not bad for an ex-backing musician with bluesology, a songwriter, somebody who is just having a go at the piano. Reginald Kenneth Dwight started banging away at the piano when he was 3 and began formal lessons at 4. His mother would sometimes put him to bed during the day so that he could play at parties during the evening. At 11, he was given a Bill Haley record and has been crazy about pop ever since. At the moment, his collection of records and tapes is over the 10,000 mark, and he can tell you the names and labels of most pop records clear back to Pat Boone and Doris Day. At the Royal Academy of Music, where he was a part-time student, he so hated classical music that as soon as he got back home, he would get out his Jerry Lee Lewis records and think that sanity had arrived back at last. He played the organ with bluesology for 3 years, which he disliked because not only they wouldn't let him sing, but he couldn't really play the organ. In 1967, he answered an advertisement for songwriters at Dick James. Also taken on for a retainer of £10 a week was a 17-year-old called Bernie Taupin, who lived in the country. The teaming was purely accidental, and at first their attempts to write hit songs for people like Engelbert Humperdinck were painful. They even had a song in the last 6 of the Eurovision Song Contest. Finally, someone charitably told them that they were writing crap, which caused them to sulk a while, get very drunk, and then decide to write songs for themselves. Although Bernie lodged for a while at Reg's house, they were not close friends. Reg loves city life, Bernie hates it, and comes up to London infrequently. I never got to know Bernie for the first year. He just used to appear from the country with a box of lyrics, and I'd spend half an hour on each writing the music. He thinks their relationship is a telepathic thing. Even now we don't get together to write, ever. Whatever the working methods, the results, which included Lady Samantha, pleased Dick James, and it was decided that an LP would be made, costing a measly £400. It was at this point that Reg decided that the world was not ready for a Reg Dwight and became Elton John. The album, Empty Sky, aroused an appreciative, if not very lucrative, hum of approval, enough to persuade James to make the follow-up, Elton John, a £7,500 deluxe package with a tasteful expensive cover and gorgeous semi-classical orchestration by Paul Buckmaster, who had studied the cello with Elton at the Royal Academy. The album came in all flavours: country rock, blues, country, white gospel, soft rock and classical rock. You could take your pick of Holy Moses, Let Us Live in Peace, Let Us Strive to Find a Way to Make All Hatred Cease, or It's a Little Bit Funny, This Feeling Inside, I'm Not One Who Could Easily Hide. And who cared if it sounded a bit like Feliciano or James Taylor or Jerry Lee Lewis or the Stones, and many others. It was well produced, well played, and because everyone was looking for a new face and a new musical direction, very welcome. Elton freely admits to being influenced by everybody and agrees that much of the appeal to all generations of people lay in the arrangements. He and Bernie had searched for a year and a half for an arranger who wasn't just chirpy, cheap cheeps. The response to Elton John within the profession was gratifying. Dusty Springfield offered to join Elton's backing singers with Madeleine Bell and Leslie Duncan, and by the time the 4th album, Madman Across the Water, like Tumbleweed Connection before it, strongly influenced by the American West, came out, Taupin and John songs were being covered by everyone from Rod Stewart and Aretha Franklin to Cilla Black and Edward Woodward. By this time, the melodies were being supplemented by Elton's star-spangled stage performances, which have earned him titles like The New Liberace and The Groucho Marx of Rock. He was apparently reluctant to stray out of recording studios onto the stage because of his weary days on the road as a backing musician, but he soon discovered that being the leader of the band was different and very much to his liking. Small, hirsute and darkly bespectacled, he looks like a less befuddled version of Bonnie and Clyde's Michael J. Pollard. He drives his piano hard, standing up, kneeling down, hand-standing on the keyboard, even playing with his feet. Further insanity is created by his looning around in bizarre outfits, bashing tambourines and wailing, impersonating, notably Jerry Lee Lewis, and occasionally even tap dancing. For his pains, he gets bruised knees from scampering around the stage and split nails from smashing away at the piano. But what's a little mutilation when you're having fun and making money? For his next trick, he is giving the orchestra a rest and making records just featuring his group in much simpler, gospel-y rock music. He had been worrying about his music becoming too stereotyped and tear-jerky. Elton John and his bloody great 100-piece orchestra. At one point, audiences, especially in the States, were expecting him to turn up with an orchestra at live concerts, and were most disappointed at first to find there weren't going to be any do-mi strings, Spanish guitar, and cor anglais. Lovely rawness. I still love orchestration, and I will probably work with Paul again, but we all felt that things were getting too machine-like. No wonder kids care more about football than they do about pop music now. It's lost all that lovely rawness and become too technical and precise. He gets on well with the younger classical musicians who have played on his albums, many of them contemporaries from the Royal Academy, including harpist Scaila Kanga, who, he remembers, used to get 100 out of 100 in exams. That breed of session musician is the best. They have classical training, but will try new things. Unlike the Royal Philharmonic, which played, unamplified, with the group, amplified, at a recent concert at the Festival Hall, the situation was one of cold warfare. Although at first Elton had a lot of respect for the Royal Philharmonic because they are better musicians technically than I'll ever be. But as far as feeling goes, in what they did for me, 80% of them appeared to have about as much feeling as cold porridge. They're like bankers or people who work in bakeries. They do the same thing every day. To them it's a 3-hour job with a 20-minute tea break in the middle. When Paul asked for quiet, and it's difficult to get 80 people quiet, one of them told him to go and get his hair cut. As for me, it was obvious that they thought, here comes that flashy little sod who hasn't been playing for 25 years. His old antagonism towards classical music isn't so evident anymore. I like classical music now that I'm not forced to play it. I'm even trying to take up reading music again. I can read chords, and that's no problem, but actually playing Chopin, once you've lost it, you have to start all over again. What did he think of the lady critic who likened some of his music to Sibelius, Nielsen, even Bartók? The height of pretentiousness, he scoffs. I get very depressed listening to Mahler and Stravinsky and wonder what's the point of it all. I really like rock and roll, but I don't think you'll find many people playing rock and roll in 100 years' time, though I imagine they'll still be playing Beethoven. I haven't heard any modern composers or seen any modern painters for that matter who have really impressed me, though I shall probably be proved utterly wrong in 100 years' time. So where does his contribution fit in? Isn't he just a big fraud? I don't think I'm a fraud. If people didn't like my records, they wouldn't buy them. But I am a product. A product who does what he does creatively, but who, compared with the great classical composers, doesn't mean much at all. For me, pop is fun, good for what it is, but when it's called art, it's a drag. It just gives some people a lot of pleasure and earns others a lot of money. It certainly seems to bring him enough money to indulge in a compulsive shopping directly he lands in a new place. He's recently come away from tours with 2 samurai dolls from Japan, a greenhorn gramophone from France, and alabaster grapes from Australia, as well as piles of records. He shops for clothes only at Yves Saint Laurent, and Granny takes a trip and buys boots at Kensington Market because he can scuttle in through the fire escape without being noticed. After white top hat and tails, star-covered overalls and teddy bear bows, he's running out of ideas for stage clothes in England. America is easier because he nearly always plays there in shorts, long socks and tennis shoes. I did the whole of my last tour in a pair of Woolworth's $2 Bermuda shorts. They were the most comfortable things to wear because it's so hot with all the leaping about I do, clothes get very sweaty and the colour runs. Actually, I'd rather go on in an old-fashioned bathing costume. A raging extrovert on the stage, Elton is rather sober and straight at home. He says it takes a lot to make him laugh. The nearest he gets to it, with me, is a quarter smile. He doesn't smoke or drink and finds pop singers boring because they tend to want to smoke marijuana and tell you how stoned they got the night before. I spent 10 days with Leon Russell in the States and we got on, and Dylan and the band seemed very nice. But the only pop person I really know is Mark Bolan. Last Christmas, Elton gave Mark a 6.5-foot high cardboard cutout of Elton, and Mark rebounded with a 17-foot cardboard cutout of Mark. They are both very into fantasy, which I kept clear of when we got onto the human qualities of Snow White's 7 dwarfs. He's a great sports fanatic, especially tennis and football, but all these take second place to music, even love. I've got no time for love affairs. About 5 years ago, I lived with this bird for about 8 months, and I was going to get married because she said she was pregnant. I didn't really want to get married because she didn't like pop music, or any music at all, really. And she wanted me to settle down and get a proper job. My music suffered all the time I was with her, and music and nothing else being my first love, I decided 3 weeks before the wedding that was it, and she wasn't really pregnant in the first place. She dominated me, and since then I haven't had any long affairs with anyone. I'm very frightened of women. They're very clever, aren't they? But I've got a lot of women friends. I like wives. All the girls I like best are already married. My producer's wife, Mark's wife. It's hard to find the right one. I remember when I first went to the States, everyone was going wild over me, and no one took any notice of Bernie. I was very angry about it at the time, but he didn't seem to mind as he fell in love out there, and that compensates for a lot, doesn't it? He was really lucky with Maxine. It came out of the blue, and it was perfect. I suppose mine will happen like that as well. I'd like lots of kids running about. Stuffed warthog. The fatherly concern reminds him that he must see his stuffed lion and warthog before he goes off to Los Angeles in the morning. He strides across the room in his aluminium-coloured boots and blue and white sleeveless Swiss roll of a sweater to phone his publicist. My lion and my warthog, he underlines urgently. Are they still there? Could you get them sent down in a cab? The voice on the other end seems to be protesting. Elton is adamant. Just ask for a cab big enough to take a lion and a warthog. The arrangement's made. He agrees to show me his collection of animals, which is now about 50 strong. They sit in a semicircle around his gilt swanned, canopied and coroneted bed, a replica of the one Josephine slept in. There's a teddy bear it takes 3 people to lift, a koala given to him by his childhood idol Winifred Atwell, a giraffe and half a dozen Snoopies, and 2 Winnie the Poohs he's looking after for Brian Forbes' children who live next door. Which is his favourite? I haven't got a favourite, he swears, because the others would be so hurt about it. He even gets upset if one of the kapok beasties falls over, and in a way one can see why. They provide, with his Alsatian Bruce and Spaniel Brian, both live, not stuffed, the only warm and comfortable feature of a nameless, doorless house, which looks as if it was furnished in an afternoon at Harrods. In fact, it was. I went to Harrods one day, and the house arrived in about 8 convoys. I'm just very impatient, and always have been. There's a dust-free remoteness about everything. Elton is obsessed about tidiness. The leather furniture is beautiful, but the pieces are so far away from one another that a herd of buffalo could pass through quite happily. Even the games room with its pin table, football and dartboard is a carpeted wasteland dotted intermittently with white PVC beanbag chairs, which suck one up like monstrous meringues. Even more alarming is the gigantic plant by the Black Steinway. I narrowly escaped a mild garrotting a couple of times. It won first prize at the Chelsea Flower Show, its owner says brightly. It took up the whole shop. It's really grown a lot since I've had it. It's now sprouting into the grand piano, as you can see. The monster's blooming health would seem to be fresh evidence for those who say that one should sing and play music to plants. And Elton has music everywhere, in his cars, while washing his hair. It's his drug. He envies American singers with their country, gospel and blues traditions. They have roots. I sometimes feel much more American than British, but my roots are listening to records.